In a peaceful colony on a distant planet, life had always been calm and quiet. The humans who lived there had built their homes among tall green trees, and they worked together to grow food, build shelters, and raise their families. It was a place of harmony, where the sun always shone brightly and the air was fresh. Among the children, there was one little girl named Emma. She was just 7 years old, with bright brown eyes and curly hair that bounced as she ran through the fields. Emma loved to explore. She spent most of her days outside, playing in the forests and chasing after butterflies. Everyone in the colony knew her, and she was always laughing and asking questions. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a soft pink, Emma wandered further than usual. She had been following a group of colorful birds that had flown deeper into the forest. The path was narrow, and the trees grew taller, casting long shadows on the ground. Emma didn't mind, though. She loved the adventure of finding new places, but as she continued walking, she suddenly felt something strange in the air. The birds she had been following had disappeared, and the forest felt unnaturally still. There was a strange hum in the air, like the wind was carrying a hidden sound. She stopped and looked around. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She had explored this part of the forest before, but something felt different today. The trees seemed taller, the shadows darker. She took a deep breath and called out softly, "Hello." Her voice echoed back to her, but no one answered. As she stood there, something moved behind the trees. Emma's curiosity got the better of her, and she took a step forward, her little feet crunching on the dry leaves. She peered through the thick branches and saw something strange. 2 figures in the distance. They were unlike anything she had ever seen before. They had tall, slender bodies and wore strange clothing that shimmered in the fading light. Their faces were smooth and pale, with no features that Emma could recognize. Without thinking, Emma stepped closer. The figures didn't seem to notice her, and she wondered what they were doing in the forest. But as she got even closer, one of them turned toward her. Their eyes were big, dark, and unblinking. Emma froze. The figure took a slow step forward, its movement smooth and almost fluid. It seemed to be studying her, as if she was the one who didn't belong there. Her heart began to race, and she instinctively backed away. But before she could turn and run, the figure reached out with its long, thin arms and gently grasped her hand. Emma gasped, pulling away in surprise. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The other figure moved closer, and they began speaking in a language she couldn't understand. The words were soft, almost musical, but they felt strange and cold at the same time. Emma tried to run, but the figures were too fast. They moved toward her, blocking her way. She looked around desperately for a way out, but the forest seemed to close in on her. She felt trapped. The figures didn't seem angry, but there was something unsettling about the way they moved. They didn't look like humans, and their eyes had no warmth or kindness in them. They were not interested in helping her. They were interested in something else, something Emma couldn't understand. Her mind raced as she tried to think of what to do. Her family would be looking for her. Her mother would be worried. But at that moment, she was alone, with no one around to help. The figures didn't seem to notice her fear. They simply watched her with their dark eyes, as if waiting for something. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the figures began to move away. Emma stood frozen, unsure of what was happening. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like they were made of stone. She watched as the 2 figures turned and walked deeper into the forest, their strange clothing shimmering in the fading light. It was as if they hadn't even seen her as a threat. They hadn't spoken a word, yet Emma could feel a sense of something larger at play, something dangerous and beyond her understanding. It wasn't until much later that Emma realized something had happened to her, something that would change everything. When she returned home, her parents were frantic. They had been searching for her for hours, calling her name, looking through the forest, and asking others if they had seen her. But Emma had not been able to explain what had happened. She only knew that those figures had touched her, and that was all. The news of her encounter spread quickly throughout the colony. People whispered and gathered in small groups, trying to understand what had happened. Some of them believed that Emma had seen something from another world, something unknown and dangerous. But no one knew for sure. What they did know was that Emma had been changed, and something about that strange encounter had unsettled the peace of their world. As the days passed, the humans began to fear what they could not understand. They had never encountered a species like this before. Who were these figures? What did they want? And most importantly, why had they come to their peaceful world? The answers were unknown, but the fear was real. Emma's encounter had set something in motion, something that would change the lives of everyone in the colony. It was just the beginning of something much larger, and soon the entire human race would be caught up in the consequences of this strange, mysterious meeting. The sun rose slowly over the quiet colony, casting a soft golden light on the buildings and trees. Everything looked calm on the outside, but inside the hearts of the people, a storm had begun to grow. The news of Emma's strange experience had spread like a quiet wave. Everyone knew her. Everyone loved her. She was the child who brought smiles, who played in the fields, who asked endless questions about the stars. But now, Emma was no longer the same. She sat silently on the edge of her bed, her eyes distant. She didn't speak much, only whispered a few words now and then. Her parents stayed close, watching her with worry and confusion. Emma had always been full of energy, always laughing. But now her silence was louder than any sound. The colony's leaders met in a small room near the center of the settlement. Their faces were serious, their voices low. No one shouted, but every word carried deep concern. One of them, an older man named Elias, leaned forward with his hands clasped tightly. "She's just a child," he said quietly, "but something happened out there. Something we don't understand." Others nodded. A woman with short gray hair spoke next. "This is not just about Emma. If something, or someone, was able to get that close to her, they could reach any one of us. We need answers." But the truth was, there were no answers. Emma's story was strange and unclear. She had seen beings no one had heard of before. She had described them in simple words: tall, smooth faces, clothes that glowed, eyes that didn't blink. No one in the colony had ever come across such beings. The nearby planets had all been explored. There were no known species that matched Emma's description. Back in the colony's homes, people locked their doors earlier. Parents held their children closer. There was no fear on the surface, just caution, quiet and careful. People continued their work, but they spoke less. They looked up at the sky more often, as if waiting for something. Emma's father, Marcus, sat outside their home each night, staring into the forest. He didn't speak much either. He remembered how his daughter had always brought him flowers from the woods, how she ran through the grass barefoot, singing to herself. Now he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened to her out there. One evening, something unexpected happened. Emma stood up from her bed and walked outside without saying a word. Her mother followed quickly, calling her name softly. But Emma didn't stop. She walked slowly, calmly, toward the edge of the colony, toward the trees. The people nearby noticed. One by one, they stepped outside and watched in silence. Emma reached the first line of trees and paused. She turned around slowly and looked back at the colony. Her voice was soft, but everyone heard it. "They're not gone," she said. "They're watching." A chill ran through the crowd. It wasn't her words alone. It was how she said them. Calm, certain, as if she had been told something important. The leaders called another meeting the same night. This time, there was no doubt. Something unknown had entered their world. It had touched one of their own. And now, it was watching. The question wasn't just about what happened to Emma. It was about what might happen next. They began to make plans, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. The safety of the colony could no longer be taken for granted. They needed to understand what was happening. They needed to prepare, not just for themselves, but for every child, every family, every future. Special groups were formed to observe the forest, to track unusual changes, to protect the borders of the colony. They worked quietly, not to cause alarm, but to build a line between what was known and what was not. The people wanted peace, but peace could not exist without understanding. Emma was watched over with care. She was not forced to speak, but gently encouraged to draw, to write, to show in any way what she had seen or felt. Slowly, little pieces of her experience began to come out. A symbol she remembered, a sound that played in her mind, a feeling that something large, something ancient, had touched her spirit and left a mark. The colony grew quieter, but not weaker. There was a sense of unity now, a deep connection between the people. They shared the same worry, the same hope. They all looked at Emma not just as a child, but as the beginning of a story they did not yet understand. And though no one said it out loud, many of them had the same thought. If these visitors had come once, they might come again. And next time, it might not be just one child they reach. Something had changed in the world, and the humans, gentle, kind, and curious, were beginning to change too. Not out of anger, but out of a deep and growing promise to each other, to protect, to stand together, and to be ready, no matter what came next. Night came quietly to the colony, wrapping the trees and houses in a soft silver light. Stars blinked gently in the sky, and the moon hovered low, casting long shadows across the quiet fields. Most families were indoors, lights dimmed, voices low. But in the minds of the people, questions continued to echo. What did Emma really see? Why did she say they were watching? And what did it all mean? In a small room near the center of the colony, Elias sat by a glowing screen, looking at long-distance scans. He had been part of the first team that helped build this place many years ago. He had seen many strange things in his life. Storms that tore through cities, animals that glowed in the dark, but never anything like this. He leaned closer as he adjusted the view, scanning the forest just beyond the colony's edge. The trees swayed gently in the wind. Nothing seemed unusual, and yet there was something. A signal, faint and unclear. Not sound, not light. Something else. He tapped a few buttons, and the machine tried to trace the source. It led toward a deep part of the forest, a place not often visited. Elias saved the data and stood up slowly. He needed to speak with the observation team in the morning. Meanwhile, Emma sat near her window, staring outside. Her eyes followed the trees as they danced with the breeze. She didn't look afraid, just thoughtful. Her mother sat nearby, reading a book but glancing at her daughter every few minutes. Emma hadn't spoken much since the night she said those strange words. They're not gone. They're watching. But now she seemed calmer. Not happier, just quiet in a different way. She picked up a pencil and began to draw on a piece of paper. At first, her mother didn't notice, but then she looked over and saw the shapes forming. A tall figure, a long robe or covering that shimmered, large dark eyes, and behind the figure, a strange object floating in the air, shaped like a circle but with lines stretching from its center like a star. "What's this, sweetheart?" her mother asked gently. Emma paused. Her voice was soft but clear. It was behind them. It wasn't touching the ground. It was just there, in the air. The drawing was shown to the colony's research group. They compared it to every known species and object. Nothing matched. No records, no files, no images from other colonies or planets. It was something new. The next morning, the observation team quietly entered the forest. They moved slowly, carefully, without making noise. They followed the data from Elias's scans, walking until the sunlight barely reached the ground. After nearly 2 hours, they reached the area the signal had pointed to. At first, there was nothing unusual, just trees, rocks, soft moss on the ground. But then one of the team members noticed something strange. a patch of earth that looked smooth and untouched, as if something heavy had rested there but left no marks. The team set up small scanners, searching for energy traces. Moments later, the scanners picked up the same faint signal Elias had found. But then, without warning, the signal vanished. Not weakened, completely gone, like it had never existed. The forest returned to stillness. The wind passed gently through the leaves. The birds returned to their songs. The team stood in silence, unsure of what had just happened. Back in the colony, Elias reviewed the new data. It made no sense. Technology didn't just stop working that way. Signals didn't just erase themselves. Whatever was out there had chosen to hide again. But now, he knew they were close. Very close. That night, something strange happened again. A young boy in the colony, Tom, Emma's classmate, woke up suddenly. He told his parents that he had seen light outside his window, soft and blue, like a glow from under the ground. When his father went to check, there was nothing there. No sound, no light, just grass and night air. But Tom insisted. It wasn't a dream. I saw it. It came from the trees. It was looking at our house. The same word again. Looking. Watching. These stories, one after another, started to feel like pieces of a puzzle. And though no one said it out loud, everyone began to sense it. Something was being studied. The colony, the people, maybe even their minds. Emma's drawings grew more detailed. More symbols, more shapes. She started drawing patterns, circles within circles, lines that crossed in strange ways. Some of the researchers began to study the shades. One of them, a younger woman named Dr. Lara, noticed something odd. "These patterns," she said, "they look like something I saw once in an old database, ancient sky maps, but not from Earth, from deep space observatories." The question grew deeper. How could a child like Emma, who had never left the planet, know patterns from space, and why were those same patterns now showing up outside her window? The colony was no longer just protecting itself. It was listening, watching, preparing. And somewhere, beyond the forest, in a place no human could yet reach, something else was listening too. It didn't speak. It didn't move in a way humans could see. But it was there. And the quiet space between two worlds was growing thinner with each passing day. Days passed, but peace did not return to the colony. People tried to continue their lives as usual, fixing machines, harvesting crops, teaching children. But the air felt different. It was heavier, filled with a quiet tension that no one could explain. The strange drawings from Emma, the blue light outside Tom's window, the fading signal from the forest, everything seemed to point toward something bigger, something just beyond their understanding. The leaders called for calm. They didn't want to create fear, only awareness. They encouraged people to stay close to their homes after sunset and to report anything unusual, no matter how small. Special listening devices were placed at the edges of the colony. Drones were sent higher into the sky, their lenses turned toward the stars. One of those drones returned with something unexpected. It had flown far beyond its usual range, near the mountain ridge to the north. There, for a few seconds, its camera had picked up something strange, a shimmer in the sky. Not a craft, not a cloud, just a shape, barely visible, like a ripple in water floating in the air. The image was unclear, but it was enough. Dr. Lara looked at the footage again and again. She compared it with the patterns from Emma's drawings. The shapes were similar, circles within circles, strange arcs that seemed to twist in on themselves. The others gathered around her, watching in silence. No one spoke the word, but they all thought it. Contact. Back in her room, Emma added a new detail to her latest picture. A tiny shape floating in the sky above a forest. She didn't look at anyone as she drew, but when she finished, she placed the paper gently on the table and said quietly, "They don't want to hurt us, but they're scared too." Her parents exchanged confused looks. "Scared?" her father asked gently. Emma nodded. They were watching before. Now they're waiting. They don't know if we'll understand. The colony had always believed in peaceful exploration. Since the beginning, humans had reached out to other species with curiosity, not conflict. But this situation was different. There had been no words, no signs of welcome, only silence and mystery. The humans didn't even know what the visitors looked like, what they wanted, or where they had come from. Elias met with the team again. They made a new plan, a peaceful signal, something simple, something non-threatening. A set of lights would be placed in the clearing where the signal had first appeared. The lights would flash a pattern taken from Emma's drawings. It was a message, not in words, but in rhythm. A hello in the language of shapes and light. When the team set up the lights, the forest was quiet. Even the birds seemed to pause as the first flash blinked in the soft darkness. Then the next, and the next. The pattern repeated for several minutes. Then the lights were turned off, and the team waited. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, just as they were preparing to leave, the trees nearby began to glow, not brightly, but softly, as if light was moving under their bark. No wind, no sound, only that gentle shimmer. The team stepped back, hearts beating fast. The lights faded after a few seconds, leaving only darkness again. But it was enough. The message had been received. That night, the colony couldn't sleep. The story spread quickly. People gathered in small groups, whispering about the glowing trees, the returned signal, and what it might mean. Some were excited. Others were unsure. But no one could ignore it anymore. Something intelligent was out there, and it was listening. Emma dreamed that night. In her dream, she stood in a great empty space. Stars floated all around her, like lanterns in the sky. In front of her stood a figure, not clear, not sharp, but soft, like it was made of mist. It didn't speak. It just raised its hand, open and calm. Emma reached out. Their hands didn't touch, but the space between them warmed. She felt a thought enter her mind, like a breeze. "We see you." She woke up quietly and looked at the stars through her window. She didn't feel afraid. She felt chosen. The colony, now more alert than ever, started building a space near the forest's edge, a place not for defense, but for connection. A small observatory, a message station, a place where light and signals could be shared, where silence could be listened to. The humans had not sent out anger or fear. They had sent a question, and someone had answered, not with words, but with light. Now, the waiting had begun again. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt like the beginning of something new. Morning light spread slowly across the colony, painting the rooftops in soft gold. Everything looked peaceful, but under the surface, a quiet storm of thoughts and feelings moved through every home. People had questions, so many questions, and only the smallest pieces of answers. Still, something had changed. Where fear once lived, a strange hope had started to grow. The message exchange from the forest had left the entire colony in a new state of awareness. For the first time, humans on this distant planet were no longer alone. But who, or what, was watching them? Were they neighbors? Were they travelers? And why had they appeared after Emma's drawing, after the child had spoken of them? In the heart of the colony, the newly built observatory was coming to life. Designed with curved walls, glass ceilings, and open space, it was made to invite, not defend. No walls, no gates, only light, symbols, and quiet technology. Engineers placed signal mirrors across the top, while scientists prepared devices that responded to the simplest energy changes: light, temperature, motion. The hope was not just to observe, but to understand, and perhaps even to reply again if another signal came. Emma had been visiting the observatory daily, sometimes sitting for hours with a pencil in her hand, drawing shapes she didn't fully understand. She said the ideas came from dreams or feelings she couldn't explain. Her drawings were calm, balanced, always with circles and soft lines. never sharp or broken. One picture in particular began to stand out, a long looping spiral that led to a bright center. Dr. Lyra believed the spiral could be a map, not of land, but of time or thought. Maybe, she said, they think in patterns, not words, not pictures, but ideas that turn in circles. Elias had another theory. He thought the drawings were a form of guidance, that maybe, somehow, Emma was connected to these beings, not as a translator, but as a bridge. She wasn't just seeing them. She was feeling what they wanted to share. One evening, just as the sun was setting, something unusual happened. A soft tone echoed through the observatory. Not loud, not sharp, just a hum, like the sound of wind passing through glass. The tone didn't come from any machine. It came from the air itself. Every sensor picked it up, but none could find the source. Emma, who was watching from the corner, stood up slowly and walked toward the center of the room. Her eyes stayed on the sky, though it showed nothing but fading light. "They're here," she said calmly. "Not near, but close enough." The tone continued for another minute, then faded away, leaving behind a feeling, something like warmth mixed with wonder. That same night, several people across the colony reported strange dreams. Dreams of floating in air, of hearing soft voices without words, of standing in wide, star-filled places where time didn't move. Some people described the same shapes Emma had drawn: circles, spirals, and slow-moving lights. In the following days, even the forest began to change. Trees that once looked ordinary began to shimmer slightly at night, as if their bark remembered the energy from the earlier message. The air felt more alive, more aware. Scientists collected small samples of soil and plant life from the glowing areas. What they found surprised them. The energy in those areas was different. It wasn't radiation. It wasn't heat. It was something unknown, something balanced. Not harmful, just unfamiliar. Meanwhile, children across the colony began drawing shapes similar to Emma's, without being shown her pictures. They said they had dreamed of light, of beings without faces, of feelings that moved like water. It became clear that this connection was not limited to one person. Whatever force had reached out, it was touching more minds now, especially those that were young, open, and curious. The colony held a meeting to discuss what should happen next. Should they continue to try communication? Should they wait? Or should they prepare for something unknown? A quiet vote was taken. The answer was simple. They would respond again. With light. With patience. With peace. So a new signal pattern was prepared, based not on human language, but on the shapes the children were drawing. Circles, waves, spirals. It would be sent at dusk, slowly, gently, without pressure. When the pattern was activated, the lights danced across the clearing, soft and rhythmic. The colony waited in silence. Minutes passed. Then the trees began to glow once more, this time, in a pattern that matched the signal. A perfect echo. A message had been returned. The entire colony stood in wonder, some with tears in their eyes. It was more than a signal now. It was understanding, a beginning. And deep in her heart, Emma whispered words that no one else heard. "They're ready to talk, but they want us to listen first." The days that followed felt like a quiet dream. Everything in the colony moved slower, softer, as if the world was holding its breath. The people continued their routines, planting, teaching, repairing, but their thoughts often drifted toward the forest and the soft lights that now answered their signals. At the observatory, the light messages had become a daily ritual. Each evening at dusk, the humans sent a peaceful pattern using the shapes shared by the children. And each time, the trees would respond, glowing gently in return. The communication was not in words or sounds, but it carried meaning, like a quiet song passed back and forth between two souls. Emma's drawings continued to evolve. She no longer just drew spirals and circles. Now her shapes were more like paths, lines connecting points, like roads on a map or pieces of music flowing from one note to another. She spoke less during the day, but her presence was calm, almost wise. People had started to call her the listener, not because she spoke to the visitors, but because she somehow heard what others could not. One morning, the entire colony woke to something strange. In the forest near the clearing, the grass had grown taller overnight, not just longer, but greener, fuller, almost glowing. Flowers had bloomed in patterns that looked like the signals they had been sending, and in the center of the clearing, where the message lights had stood, something new had appeared. A stone. Smooth, round, and shining faintly in the sun. It hadn't been there before. No one had seen it arrive. There were no tracks, no sign of movement. Just the stone, sitting quietly in the middle of the clearing like it had always belonged there. The scientists approached it carefully. The surface was warm to the touch, not hot, just comfortably warm. It hummed gently when touched, almost like a sleeping heartbeat. And it wasn't just stone. Inside the smooth surface were patterns, spirals, lines, waves, just like Emma's drawings. Dr. Lyra was the first to speak. This is not just an object. It's a message, a gift. Elias agreed. It's not meant to scare us. It's an answer. The colony formed a circle around the stone that evening. They didn't speak much. There were no speeches or loud ideas, only quiet respect. The children sat closest, their eyes wide with wonder. Some reached out and gently touched the surface. It shimmered faintly with their touch, like a quiet hello. That night, Emma stood beside the stone longer than anyone else. She placed both hands on it, closed her eyes, and stood still for a long time. When she opened her eyes again, she looked at the stars and whispered, "They are ready to be seen." After that, the colony began preparing, not for conflict, not for defense, but for welcome. They cleared a new path from the observatory to the clearing. Lights were placed gently along the trail, casting soft golden glows through the trees. People began placing drawings, poems, and small items beside the stone, things they loved, things that mattered to them. A child left a hand-drawn picture of their pet bird. A teacher placed a copy of a favorite storybook. An engineer left a small solar light that blinked gently with energy. These were not gifts meant to impress. They were symbols of peace, of sharing, of trust. Then, just as the moon reached its highest point a few nights later, the lights on the path began to flicker, not with failure, but with movement. The trees shimmered again, but this time it wasn't just a response. It was something else. Shapes moved in the distance, soft, slow, and nearly invisible, like light itself had taken a form and stepped into the clearing. No one screamed. No one ran. The people simply stood and watched as the shapes grew clearer, not sharp, but flowing, like smoke in water. They didn't look like anything the humans had seen before. Not animals, not machines, but they weren't frightening. They glowed with a soft blue hue. They moved gently, never touching the ground directly. They circled the stone, as if recognizing it. Then one of them turned toward Emma. She stepped forward, calm and fearless. She didn't speak. She didn't move quickly. She simply raised her hand, palm open. And then the sheikh did the same. Not a hand like a human's, but the motion was the same, a greeting. A moment passed, silent, full of wonder. And then the sheikh drifted back, slowly fading into the night with the others. No words, no sounds, just connection. The colony stood in silence long after the shapes were gone, but no one felt alone anymore. They didn't know what came next, but they knew one thing clearly now. They had been seen, and they had been heard. In the days that followed the first true meeting, something shifted deep within the hearts of every person in the colony. The forest no longer felt like a mystery to be solved, but a place of quiet understanding, a bridge between two very different worlds that had finally touched. The glowing shapes, those gentle beings of light and motion, had not returned in the same way. But their presence lingered. The stone in the clearing pulsed with a slow, calming rhythm now, like a heartbeat shared between the earth and the stars. No one tried to move it or study it too deeply. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a puzzle. It was something else, something sacred. Emma remained close to the stone every day. Though she was still a child, the colony had begun to listen to her with a kind of reverence. Her words were simple, but they carried a depth that made even the oldest scientists pause. She spoke of feelings more than facts, of impressions rather than clear messages. "They want us to grow," she said once, "but not just with tools or buildings. They want us to grow here." And she placed her hand over her heart. Engineers and builders, inspired by the contact, began reshaping parts of the colony, not to make it stronger, but to make it more open. Walls became gardens. Towers became beacons. The observatory transformed into a sanctuary of shared learning and wonder, open to both the stars and the woods. One morning, a new shape appeared near the clearing. Not a visitor, not a being, but a circle of small stones arranged in a perfect spiral. No one had placed them there. There were no footsteps, no sign of movement, just the spiral, like Emma had drawn long ago. It was clear. The others were still watching, still listening. Dr. Lyra led a group to quietly observe the spiral. They noticed that each stone, while ordinary at first glance, carried a slight warmth. When touched, it gave off a soft hum, different for each person. Some said it reminded them of memories, laughter, music, dreams. Some said it made them feel calm, connected, understood. Elias believed the spiral was an invitation, not to follow, he said, but to reflect. They are showing us their way of being. Gentle, patient, deep. Soon, the spiral became a place of quiet gathering. People visited not with questions, but with thoughts. Some meditated, some drew, some simply sat in silence. It became known as the Circle of Peace. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the colony's small weather drones, sent out for routine sky mapping, picked up something new in orbit. Not a ship, not a satellite, just a gentle pulse of light, blinking at perfect intervals. The pattern matched the same rhythm as the stone's heartbeat. A signal, perhaps, or a reminder. Elias and Lyra both agreed. This was not a sign of danger. It was a thread, a connection reaching further than they had imagined. The visitors were not just in the forest. They were far above, too, maybe watching not only this colony, but the entire journey of humankind. And then, one evening, something beautiful occurred. The stars over the clearing grew brighter. Not all at once. One by one, the sky lit up in patterns, not like constellations, but like messages drawn in slow, shimmering motion. The lights blinked in harmony with the pulse from the stone, and the spiral of rocks began to glow. The colony gathered in silence. No one needed to be told to come. They just felt it. Something important was happening. Emma stood at the center of the spiral. She didn't speak. She simply turned and looked at everyone, her face calm, her eyes wide and full of light. Then, slowly, a circle of soft lights began to rise around her, hovering, spinning gently. They didn't touch her. They didn't make a sound. They just moved, like leaves dancing in slow wind. And as the lights moved, people began to hear something, not with their ears, but in their hearts. It was not a voice. It was a feeling. A message of understanding. A message of peace. A message that said, "We know who you are. We remember your kindness. We see your care. You are not alone." Tears fell. Smiles broke through the silence. Even the oldest members of the colony stood in awe, their hands over their hearts. And then, as softly as they had appeared, the lights faded into the night sky, leaving behind nothing but stars, and the warm, steady heartbeat of the stone. From that day on, the humans no longer called them strangers. They were known simply as the others who listen. And humanity, once small and uncertain in the vast universe, had found something greater than power or control. They had found connection. And in that connection, they found peace.